the game too?
I went full throttle, 6th gear. It was just an amazing experience. I love the fact that we have the best home field advantage in the whole league. It's fantastic.
And the best defensive, it appears, and some of the best refs, best trained refs.
Only the highest caliber up here.
What do you think about that, though? Because you have these refs, and I get the union, and I get crossing the picket line, and, the best people in the business, well, they're not allowing them to come in and do the job because of the referee lockout. But what do you think about these guys who go in and literally know in front of millions and millions of people that they're probably not going to do a good job?
Yeah, that's pretty brutal. I mean, if I was thrown into the fire like that, I would just sit in front of NFL tape and watch referee after referee and just stay in that rule book because, it can be so awful if you really blow it. This is just the 3rd game of the season, and I'm sure Green Bay fans are sad. But the bottom line is these things ebb and flow over the season, and you probably will end up with the same number of wins because you get some, and then you have some taken away.
Yeah, you're right. In the grand scheme of things, wins and losses, it probably, it's not overly important. But from a professional standpoint, you know what you're good at when it comes to residential real estate. And I imagine there's things you wouldn't do that are in the real estate field because that's not what you're a professional at.
Oh, absolutely. No one wants who wants to do a face plant? You want to look good at what you're doing. Yeah, I definitely stay within what I excel at. And then if something comes along that is way out of my field, like, say, negotiating a high-dollar commercial lease, I punt. Yeah. That's just the way to go.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here, even after, checking out the game. Your voice sounds just fine, Michael. So, let's talk about then real estate, because there are intricacies of real estate, as there are intricacies of a football game, that only a professional truly knows. And, some of those really have to do with the contract. When you brought up a high rent lease, but just in the regular, in the residential real estate, there's still some pretty important pieces of the contract.
Yeah, and the thing we're going to talk about today, contingencies, and that is, those are probably the biggest part of a residential real estate contract, because that is how you or any buyer can walk away from a deal. You're committed with your earnest money to a point, but if you have a valid escape due to a contingency, then you can terminate the deal and you're not forced to buy the house or risk losing your deposit.
And so contingencies are kind of these, you almost call them like they're steps that you have to go over, hurdles that you have to get through that allow you to kind of back out of the deal if it isn't what you hoped it was or wanted it to be.
Exactly. They usually happen in a sequence, but keep in mind, one of the most critical things is all these contingencies have a negotiated timeline up front, and that is wide open. For example, the default and the inspection contingency is 10 days, but this is a fast market here. If I'm helping someone sell and we get a 10-day inspection contingency, I'm going to have my seller counter at 5 days, because you should be able to get someone in there and get this done in 5 days. And keep in mind, that is 5 business days. So it does not count the calendar days of the weekend. So in effect, you could get 7 calendar days.
Our inspectors would say, but we're busy, Michael.
Hey, got to get it done.
That's right.
We all work nights and weekends. Everyone else should too. I'm biased.
Except for Monday nights, right?
except for Monday nights.
We are here with Michael Busacca with Skyline Properties, Michael. So let's kind of go through what some of these contingencies are, and and maybe some of the ways you look at them from different perspectives.
Yeah, actually, I do need to start with one important detail. All these contingency timelines are going to come off of mutual acceptance, and that is when all the haggling up front is done. The dust settles, all terms are agreed to, and if that happens on, let's say, Monday the 21st, everything's countering off that. It's a critical detail. Once that mutual acceptance is established, then at that point, earnest money is deposited, and everyone usually steps into their inspection contingency, unless, of course, it was a multiple offer situation, they pre-inspected.
And so now you have this contract, and now you have these again, I call them hurdles, contingencies, that you now have to go through, these checkpoints or whatnot. When you start looking at the checkpoints, what are some of the big ones that people go through? An inspection, as you just said, is one of them.
Yeah, and I'll break down the inspection contingency. A buyer has to not only have their inspection performed by a state licensed inspector, but they also have to submit their request within that time period. Let's say you have 5 days. by 9 p.m. on the 5th day, you have to submit one of 4 responses. You can accept the inspection, waive that contingency, meaning you're fine with everything, or you can disapprove of the inspection, and then you terminate the agreement, you get your deposit back. Third option, you can request time for an additional inspection. This is very important. Home inspectors are generalists. So if a home inspector says, hey, have professional A, B, or C look at roof, furnace, you name it, you can request additional time to do that. Fourth option, you can request a modification of the contract. You can request the seller to reduce the price, to give you a closing cost credit, or to fix A, B, or C.
Now, what happens if it's not done in those 5 days or 10, whatever the time frame is? And what happens if they just don't submit in one of those 4 things?
Perfect question. Then you as a buyer, you've automatically waived that contingency, which means you are now much more serious about buying this property. So you must respond in that time period. And the MLS and attorneys, everyone take this very seriously. So know that if you want to walk away, if you want to negotiate, you have to get this done by 9 p.m. on that final day. And
is that something that, a real estate agent, you walk them through that? It's something that, somebody isn't doing on their own necessarily.
Exactly. My goal and every professional's goal is no surprises, regarding the contract. So I'm going to show, right when mutual acceptance happens, I sit my buyers down and say, here's the roadmap. Here are all the forks in the road. So that no one can say, oh, my goodness, I didn't know that I couldn't go to this rock concert tonight. I had to be here to sign this. So everyone knows when to be available. Everyone knows when to respond by.
So what about if you just don't want the house anymore? The cold feet per se.
Yeah, that is very much the option with the inspection contingency. As a buyer, you don't have to state what you don't like about the property. Even new construction, you can up and just check the box saying the inspection is disapproved, this agreement is terminated. The state people who create the forms and instruct all of us brokers told us that to our face. Hey, a buyer doesn't even have to hire an inspector. A buyer can simply go by the property after mutual acceptance, see something that they didn't notice before, say, hey, we're done. And you don't have to specify what you didn't like.
So really, you can you can inspect anything. You could say in your mind, you can think, well, it's just not big enough, or it doesn't feel the way it did when I first came in. And that would be considered part of an inspection, really.
Yeah, we wouldn't be that explicit, but yeah, they can completely fall in that category.
Yeah, and just walk away. Interesting. Yes. So then, okay, so you get through the inspection, everything looks good, roof's good, furnace is good, everything you hoped it was is. What is the next step, or what's that next checkpoint or contingency?
The next one typically is financing. And there are other contingencies too, like short sale, title, stuff like that. Those are big topics unto themselves, but financing's a big one, and here's one real critical distinction. Financing is not a cold feet walk away. You have to make a good faith effort as a buyer to go get financing, and only if, after you've made that good faith effort, the bank decides you are not a worthy borrower, then at that point you can terminate the deal.
And, okay, so when, coming from the mortgage business, certainly the financing is something that, a lot of people think they've maybe, I got pre-approved. And that's really not what this is. This is a much more solid, it's the money's there. It's not just pre-approved the way that a lot of people think.
Yeah, as you know, mortgage folks have desktop underwriting. They have enough tools at their disposal to say, hey, this is a person that we're likely to lend money to, but not we're going to guarantee. Under the pre-approvals, it even says that this is not a guarantee to lend. Mm-hmm. So, and it all comes down to, as you know, making the underwriter happy. So, if the underwriter,
which is such a fun thing to do sometimes.
Yeah, we all we all love that. Basically the whole industry pivots on whether or not underwriters will greenlight our borrowers, our buyers, or not. And if it's a red light, we're back at square one.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about pursuing financing with a good faith effort, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, it's very explicit in the contingency. I won't bore you with all the details, but basically it says that you had the funds for the down payment available when you made application, that you supplied everything that the mortgage broker required, W-2 statements, pay stubs, things of that nature. You had credit pulled. But only down the road when the underwriter took a closer look at the file and saw that, hey, maybe there's some things in your credit past that they actually are concerned about. Maybe they don't feel you have worthy enough reserves, things of that nature. Or maybe you haven't been on the job long enough. It's those little extra details that all of a sudden an underwriter will just say, nope, you got to come back in 6 months or a year.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the things that do come up. And, a lot of times people will think about, like, one thing that has come up. And, in fact, we came up with a client today that was, their child support. Well, their kid's, like, just turned 15 and is now older than 15. And because it won't continue for 3 years, it's no longer valid for your debt-to-income ratio. So you get these very quirky things that can come up and kill the deal in sometimes.
Yeah, some things are just super complex. Like, I had a client, great guy, works in international waters on oil rigs, offshore oil rigs. I mean, hard, intense job. And he got paid through a third party in Dubai, and it was very difficult for one lender to, to basically say, hey, we certified this income. This doesn't look too mysterious for us. This isn't coming out of some strange Russian bank account or something. So, and the first lender just, couldn't make the underwriter happy. So we had to reboot and go get another lender who happened to be Cobalt.
Oh, look at us.
And Ken Smith, who I work with a lot at Cobalt, went downstairs and talked to me, an underwriter, and said, will you lend on this? And the underwriter said, you bet. And away we ran.
We are here with Michael Busacca, broker with Skyline Properties. Michael, so you have even your inspection contingency, your financing contingency, and then you start getting into a title contingency. And what is that? I mean, this is why these contracts get so long.
Exactly. And title's just such a huge topic unto itself. That's why we have specialists who do nothing but title insurance, because the legalese will bury you. But in short version, if there are liens on the title, encumbrances, title's basically a legal inspection to make sure that if you're buying 10 acres in the North Cascades, that a right-of-way wasn't sold to the railroad, and the railroad won't sign off on that to get the deal to close. Basically making sure there's no legal impediment to closing the deal.
Has that happened on one of your deals where a railroad was sold to something? How is that your example?
I try to use that as a real obvious example for my clients. I haven't had anything that complex, but I've had simpler things. For example, a client was selling a home over at Phantom Lake in Bellevue. Her son backed his car out of the driveway, tapped the neighbor's car, $500 worth of damage. Well, the neighbor sued and timed it so that my clients were out of state and got a default judgment for $500. He had that default judgment attached to the deed. So escrow could not legally close the deal without knowing they could disperse the $500 to this neighbor and close the deal. So that is a roll tile escrow play.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of crazy
stuff.
Real
nice neighbor, huh?
Yeah. Fantastic neighbor. I did.
Why? I'm surprised the guy wanted to move into that house after knowing that neighbor was that richity.
Yeah, boy, that would be a drag. Well, I love this house, but my neighbor is a bummer.
Yeah, man. I think is that part of the inspection, neighbors?
There is a neighborhood review part of the inspection contingency. You can check that box, and you can walk away for any reason. And, generally I try to have my clients do a neighborhood review prior to even putting in an offer. But sometimes people have an offer accepted. They go back, drive by the property they're in love with at 9 p.m., and they see, pick your undesirable thing, a bunch of teenagers partying, too much road noise, maybe trucks are going by, you name it.
Lights from car, what could be anything, I suppose.
Yeah, it literally could be anything. One skunk in the neighborhood and you're gone.
So, what about, and we do have to go to break here in just a few minutes, but what are some of the other big contingencies that we see?
Let's talk about the short sale contingency just in brief. So, short sale contingency, that is the only time when the timelines for inspection financing do not start at mutual acceptance. They start when the approval comes from all underlying lien holders, anyone holding a debt on the property, approve the loss that they will take based on that contract. So let's say you start a contract, you have a 60-day short sale contingency, and let's say on day 50, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, whoever says, okay, we're willing to accept X loss on this and relieve the seller of any future liability for this debt. Then on that day, day 50, then we start all the timelines for inspection, title, and financing.
And so then you have it just kind of extends that time frame, really.
Exactly, because the bottom line is none of us want our buyer clients to commit to an inspection fee, an appraisal fee to put forth really any time and energy until they know the bank will accept the loss, because there's no guarantee of that. And we're all in the dark until that bank get together in their little bat cave or wherever they meet.
Wherever they're doing it.
And say yes.
That's right. Okay, and then the last thing before we go to break is, a lot of people maybe hear the word contingency and they think, well, I'm going to buy a house contingent on selling my house. I mean, that seemed to be a very common term, right?
It is. It is definitely I'd say it's the number one way that the average person on the street is familiar with the term contingency. Contingency is, any way out of a contract, but in all likelihood, they're referring to the purchaser of home A needing to sell their existing home, home B, to get the net proceeds to purchase home A, and then to also qualify for the loan. Not many people can qualify for two loans at once. Right.
Well, Michael, we do have to go to break. Thanks so much for joining us again. Michael Busacca with Skyline Properties, and, it's just one of those, another reason you really do have to know somebody or work with somebody who is a true professional and understands all the contingencies and all the details of a contract and of a purchase of a home. And the same way, I guess it goes back to, the details, unlike the current NFL refs. I always got to bring it back to that. We do have to go to break. We will be back. David Murphy is going to join us. We're going to talk a little bit about credit. And if you own a business or know somebody who does, you will not want to miss out on what David has to say. We'll be right back.